We're going to take you on a dramatic and fast-paced tour of Saigon, and we're going to do it in a unique way on the back of a motorcycle. We'll be taking you from one end of the city to the other, showing you a real cross-section of Saigon and illustrating how the city functions from street-level viewpoint. So come along and let's take a ride. We're starting our tour in the central modern heart of downtown Saigon. This very modern section is not a very large area. Maybe it's about 10 square blocks. And it's quite spectacular with many brand new stores and cafes and hotels and high-rise buildings. There's a lot of upscale shops here. There's the Louis Vuittons and the Gucci's and the trendy cafes and the wonderful restaurants. This high-end glamour is really not typical of the rest of Saigon. About 95% of the city is a real working class kind of place, as we're going to be showing you on our motorcycle ride from one end of town to the other. Riding on a motorcycle taxi in Saigon, that's another good way to get around. You go fast, you cut right through the traffic, and it's inexpensive. It's a lot of fun and very safe. You don't see motorcycles crashing here. It's very safe, right? No problem. And you get a real good view of the scenery this way on the back of a motorcycle. Saigon, we love ya. And one of the best ways to see this wonderful city is on the back of a motorcycle. You can rent a moto taxi very cheap, and they're available everywhere. It's a great way to get around town. We are going to drive you across town and starting out in the modern downtown area where they've got some fancy shops, very upscale down here, beautiful sidewalks, very clean. And we're going to take you all the way across town on the back of a bike. From that seat, you get a lot of fresh air and an unobstructed view. So we'll be checking out the traffic as we go, the motorcycles, the people, the sidewalks, the shops along the way. It all adds up to a most amusing and multidimensional way of looking at the city. You can focus on the crazy traffic if you like, or look at all the buildings whizzing by, or the people on the sidewalks. There's a lot to see. It really fills the eye. People in Vietnam don't have a lot of money by Western standards, but many young people do have enough to afford a new motorcycle. And they see it not only as a great way of getting around town, but it's kind of a status symbol. These young affluent consumers are switching to slightly more expensive scooters as a luxury fashion accessory. And they really take good care of them. You see they're washed and polished and looking good. Or how about 3 people or 4 people on a little motorcycle? You see that quite often as you notice here driving along in the streets of Saigon. Very typical to have the husband driving, the wife sitting behind him, one small child between them, and maybe another small child in front of the father. 4 people. It's very ecological to have 2 people on a little motorcycle. It gets about 60 miles to the gallon or 80 miles to the gallon, and with 2 people on board, you effectively double that. Or with 3 people, you're getting the equivalent of 150 miles to the gallon. You can't beat that. In America, our rules are very strict about such things. Also very strict, for example, about having a passenger on a moped. Oh, that's not allowed in America. 2 people on a 50cc machine is very common in Asia, but it's not allowed in America. You can fit a lot more vehicles on the road if they're motor scooters and motorcycles rather than cars, so it's very efficient. Actually, most of the motorcycles that we see in the movie are a little bigger than your typical moped. Moped has a 50cc engine, and these motorcycles in the streets of Saigon typically are 150cc, maybe 200cc, which provides sufficient power to make them safe to operate. And that's big enough. It's very rare to see a much bigger motorcycle, which are popular in America, but you don't need that kind of big size for driving in the city. After all, motorcycles can go up to 1200 cc's, 1400, They have big engines, a lot of horsepower, Harley Davidsons, Kawasaki racing machines that you find more typically in America. Typical American over-the-top kind of usage, overdoing it. You don't need that kind of power and speed anywhere really, unless maybe you're on the open highway, a long cross-country voyage. Sure, it's good to have a lot of power. But for urban driving, the small motorcycle is ideal. Worldwide, scooters can be seen as one of the most popular ways of getting around. They are very ecological after all, and they're also very sociable. You can be driving along, as the Vietnamese love to do, and chatting with your fellow drivers as you go. Maybe you're doing 25, 30 miles an hour, and you're driving side by side with a friend and carrying on a conversation. For short trips that are typical of the urban scene, say of a few miles, why should you be driving a 4,000-pound hunk of metal, a big car, when you could just as easily drive on a very lightweight and economical motor scooter? To confess a certain personal bias, I will admit that I am a motorcycle lover. I've been riding one kind of two wheels or another for 40 years. Big motorcycles, little motorcycles, mopeds. Currently, a Honda 150 motor scooter is my ride of choice. And in fact, that's becoming the most popular, I must say, the most popular kind of two-wheel vehicle in the world, the small motorcycle. And that's certainly what you find here in Vietnam. And of course, gasoline is fairly expensive no matter where you are in the world. In a country like Vietnam, people just can't afford to buy huge amounts of gasoline. So again, the motorcycle is a very economical option. There are monthly rentals available, and that's also very reasonable, starting at about $60 a month for a small motorcycle, or up to $80 for a slightly bigger one, slightly better one. So very inexpensive. Everybody is on good behavior on the road, and they're really not going that fast. We're putting along at about 15, 20 miles an hour. So it's a comfortable speed. We're making progress. We're getting across town. These drivers are really highly skilled. It's nothing like drivers in America. They were born with it. They were brought up with it, and they practice it today as adults. And they're all very easygoing, very sociable. The traffic laws are such that it's designed to keep the traffic flowing. And the traffic flows together in the sense that you don't see speed demons racing along and trying to pass everybody else like you might in America or in the Western world. The people here have a more cohesive society, a more sociable society, it would seem, especially judging from their behavior on the road. They're all in it together. Nearly every one of these motorcycles has a good muffler. Of course, they're beeping their horns. That's how they communicate. It doesn't do much good when everybody's beeping their horns, but that's just part of the music of the streets. But you're not hearing that loud, harsh, blasting roar of a motorcycle without a muffler. They don't have straight pipes here. So there must be some kind of law that they're enforcing. A related safety factor for the pedestrian is that when you're crossing the street, just pick a path and walk and be aware of the motorcycles coming at you, but don't worry about it. Don't run, don't stop. Just walk at a steady pace on a straight path so that they can see you and they're going to veer around you. It's very dangerous if the pedestrian should stop suddenly in the middle of the road or run, because that throws off the drivers. They're planning to just miss you. They're going to veer either just to the left of you or just to the right of you. So you walk along at a steady pace and you'll make it no problem to the other side of the road. You're not going to find very many marked crosswalks, and traffic lights are sometimes not available. So you'll be jaywalking. You'll be crossing at mid-block. And there too, the laws are very casual. Jaywalking is fine. There's no laws against it. You're not going to get a ticket. You're not going to get busted for crossing the street like you might in some of our more strict American situations. And why not? It's perfectly safe if you know what you're doing to walk across the street at mid-block. The most popular brand in Vietnam is the Honda, and Honda is definitely gearing up production, as are several of the other world major motorcycle manufacturers in Vietnam. They are looking for good times ahead. So the motorcycle producers in the country are seeing good prospects for the future. 3 million motorcycles were sold last year in Vietnam. The growth is reaching 35% every year, so that's really quite phenomenal. And Honda has really caused a market sensation with some of their new products. There's the Airblade model, which is a 110cc, and they sold 300,000 of those a few years ago, and last year they believe to have sold 1 million of that particular model of Honda. You've seen that the motorcycle is more than just a way of getting around town. It's really an extension of the body. It's part and fabric of the culture here. These scooter manufacturing companies are gearing up production to such a high level that they're able to export quite a number of motor scooters to the nearby countries and the surrounding regions such as Thailand and Malaysia. And they're even exporting scooters back to Japan and Korea and onto Australia and Indonesia. And they're manufacturing parts as well for export. So it's really a booming industry. Honda's increasing their production capacity to fulfill the customers' orders, and they're hoping to produce 2 million motorcycles a year in the very near future. Now, there's also scooters that are imported from China, but the quality is not quite as good as those scooters that are made in Vietnam. My driver's an expert. He's a professional motorcycle taxi driver, yes? How many years you drive motorcycle taxi?
Me?
Yeah, how many years?
About 5 years.
5 years, motorcycle taxi.
Yeah.
And you can bargain a little bit, get a good price. And right now we're in the center of town, very busy spot. As we roll along through these fascinating and busy streets of Saigon, I'd like to share some general observations with you about motorcycles and traffic and life on the streets in this amazing city. It's a big city. There's about 6 million people in the town and probably another 6 million people in the surrounding metropolitan region. It's estimated that there might be 3 million motorcycles or maybe 4 million motorcycles. It's a little hard to tell. So this is a very large downtown, and we're going to be driving across it. It's about a 1-hour motorcycle ride that we'll be summarizing for you here in the program. As we drive past block after block of continuous shop fronts, you begin to realize that the economy here is doing pretty well. In fact, economic growth in Vietnam has been averaging about 9% every year in the last decade. So it's really making some remarkable progress. They manufacture many of the goods that they sell and have a very diverse and strong economy. Of course, tourism is a big part of that, so they want to encourage you to come visit. And as we drive along, you will see what a fascinating destination it is. And you'll notice that many of the people here are really quite friendly. They see us driving along, and there's some smiles and there's some waves, and very, very nice people on the roads here. This video was photographed using a special Steadicam rig to make it a very smooth and flowing picture for you, so it's easy on the eyes. Well, we've covered the central market area in District 1. Now we're going over to Cholon, which is Chinatown. That's another busy area. It's rush hour. It's right about 5:30 on a Monday, so traffic is pretty heavy, but it's amazing. It moves pretty well. Yeah. It moves pretty good thanks to all these motor scooters. Most people in Saigon, they drive motor scooters or motorcycles instead of a car. And they're just little motorcycles, about 100cc engine. That's all you need, right?
right.
Big enough? Okay. Where are we going now?
If you want this way, Chinatown.
Okay. Let's go. I think that's a busy place, yeah?
Yeah, very busy.
Many people.
Yes, so much.
Cholon.
Yes.
The drivers are driving really in harmony with each other without worrying about dodging. It's almost a subconscious kind of reaction as they're driving along. They're alert, they're aware, they're looking around and listening, no doubt. But it's almost automatic pilot. At times it might look a little crazy to a Western viewer or one who's accustomed to automobiles, but you'll soon realize that the motorcycles are the best way around town. You might be used to some bumper-to-bumper traffic at home, but it's really nothing compared to what you see here in Saigon. The motorcycles are everywhere, including on the sidewalks. Oh yes, they can park on the sidewalks. It's all very casual here. Their rules are pretty loose. Even the traffic regulations are pretty loose. The traffic lights are more advisory than mandatory in some cases here. But why not allow the motorcycles to park on a sidewalk as long as they're not blocking the pedestrians and there's room to get by generally. And they're driving along at a very moderate pace. It's only about 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, just enough to keep moving. You're not stopping, you're not slowing down, you're not speeding, you're not racing. So young people, 2 years old, 3 years old, are very used to riding on these motorcycles. They all do it. That's how they get around. And this turns them into really excellent drivers. Think about it. If you've been on two wheels riding on a motorcycle since you were a baby, it's ingrained in your behavior. Well, we're getting closer to Chinatown now.
Yes.
Another half a mile maybe. Traffic is thick and heavy. Rush hour is reaching a peak.
10 years.
10 years.
10 years. Our traffic in Vietnam very good. Now not good.
Not so good now. The population's increasing rapidly here in Saigon. In the last 10 years, it's doubled. So it's a pretty wild traffic situation. But imagine if everybody had cars, it would really be gridlock. It would be completely impossible. They're talking about building a subway. They might build a metro, but that's expensive. It takes a long time. It would be underground if they do it. A nice modern metro system. And people wouldn't have to ride so many motorcycles all the time. But the weather is good for riding a motorcycle. And the drivers are really good. They just veer and weave and dodge, and you know, they're not going to hit you. Everybody is on good behavior on the road, and they're really not going that fast. We're putting along at about 15, 20 miles an hour. So it's a comfortable speed. We're making progress. We're getting across town. We're not stuck in gridlock. Some of these intersections have traffic lights, and they pay attention. Others, there's traffic lights and they just drive right through if it's red. They don't care. And a lot of intersections don't have any traffic lights at all. You have two streets coming together, and the motorbikes just take their turns and weave in and out, and somehow it all seems to function. Although the motorcycles are small, they do have some power, and that's important for a safety factor. You want to be able to get out of a jam with a little squirt of the gas and acceleration. So these motorcycles have got about 150 cc's, and some of the newer ones have got fuel injection, which certainly helps to boost the power so that you have enough reserve power to accelerate away from a jam. But that's unusual. They're all going about the same speed. You really see a lot more around you when you're riding on the scooter compared to being inside a car, locked up inside a metal box. You might have air conditioning and the windows up. You can't really see 360 around you when you're in such a car. But on the motorcycle, you can see everything. Automobiles are quite expensive in Vietnam. When you buy a new automobile, the tax can be as much as 100% of the sales price of the car. And then you've got the problem of parking, and you've got the biggest problem of driving. Cars just don't get by in these streets nearly as well as motorcycles do. Can you imagine what these streets would look like, how crowded they would be if all of these vehicles were automobiles instead of motorcycles? It just wouldn't work. It would be complete gridlock. But instead, even though the traffic is pretty heavy with the motorcycles, it just keeps moving, it keeps flowing. It's like a flock of birds or a school of fish. And for the tourist, you can very easily take advantage of this situation by hopping on the back of a motorcycle taxi, as I'm doing here today. It's only about $1 or $2 an hour for driving around, and you can negotiate a price with your driver for a half day of touring if you like. The driver will take you to the various sightseeing highlights and do a little bit of describing and translating for you, and they'll certainly sit and wait outside while you go in and take a look, take some pictures, come on back out. Your driver is waiting for you, and you hop on and off you go to your next destination. That's the easy way on the back of a motorcycle taxi. If you're more daring, you can rent a motorcycle yourself. No problem. You don't need any special license. There's motorcycle rental shops all over town, and the going rate is about $5 a day. Compare that to the cost of a rental car in America. So this is really a good deal. We've now arrived in the heart of Chinatown at the Bingtei Market. It's a huge covered marketplace. It's wholesale and retail, and just a fascinating place to walk around and do some shopping or window shopping or just simply browsing and people watching. We'll bring you inside the large market of Bintan in another episode about Saigon. As we drive by the shops along the outside of the market, you get a real feeling for the casual life in the streets here in Saigon. It's a busy city, it's a huge city, but it's also a very laid-back kind of place. After all, here we are at a central shopping area, and there's people hanging out. This is a lifestyle that's gone on for generations, and it's wonderful to see it continuing today. It's the Bingtei Market, which is the biggest covered market and market street area in all of Saigon. Very much a local place. Really a lot of hustle bustle here in the streets and inside the market. The entire neighborhood for several blocks all around the outside of the market is also a happening place with lots of street vendors and open front shop stalls and people everywhere. This is a great place to explore when you're visiting. You'll find the motorcycle taxi drivers everywhere in town. You'll see them waiting around. One sure sign is that they have an extra helmet, because helmets are required. Some drivers don't wear helmets, but there's a helmet law here. So you see a couple of guys with their motorcycles and extra helmets. Very easily, you can get a ride with them. They call it a moto or a siom. That's the local slang for the motorcycle. And they are available on many street corners. The men are sitting on or near their motorbikes, and they're pretty obvious. They will perhaps approach you. They might be driving by and offer you a ride. So you'll find it very easy to find these motorcycle taxis. Well, it took about 1 hour to drive across town and show you the sights that we've just seen. And holding that camera out on the Steadicam arm got a little tiring after a while, so the driver suggested that we return via a speedier route. There's actually a nice highway along the edge of downtown, paralleling the canal, and that would be much faster, maybe 10-15 minutes to get back to where we started, rather than going back through the busy streets of downtown. So I guess we've seen enough. It's time to head on back to the hotel, rest up a little bit, and head on out for dinner. Hope you enjoyed the ride. That just about completes our wild motorcycle ride through Saigon. We went from one end of town to the other, from the busy downtown, the upscale shops, through the markets, all the way over to Chinatown. It's about 8 kilometers from one side to the other, so it took us a little while, but it's about a 1-hour sightseeing ride. It's a great way to see the town. So you can use a motorcycle taxi for sightseeing, for a little tour. Just let the driver take you where he knows best. Or you can use a taxi to get from point A to point B. If you're going to a restaurant or you're going to sightseeing, hop on a taxi and go. You'll love it. And that brings to an end our long motorcycle ride through Saigon, taking you from one end of town to the other.
All right, we made it.
When we got back to the Caravel Hotel, I asked my driver to recap our journey.
Where did we go on our ride?
We are go to city Saigon and Chinatown. So many.
Busy, yeah?
Yeah, very busy.
But no problem for you?
Yes.
Easy.
Yeah.
Easy driving. Okay, well you did a good job. What's your name?
Nam. Very
Nam.
easy.
Nam, N-A-M.
Yes.
Nam.
Vietnam.
Fortunately, we had just enough daylight left to cover the odyssey from one end of Saigon to the other, ending up with a beautiful sunset and a return to the 5-star comforts of the Caravel Hotel. We have a lot more movies about Vietnam covering the highlights of this wonderful country, taking you to Hanoi, Saigon, Hue, Hoi An, and much more.